in this section of the video, we're dealing with diseases that come from eating pork. And what we have to remember is the reason that God tells us in the Bible and the Holy Quran, the reason that all of the 3 major religions in the earth prohibit eating swine flesh is because God desires for us to live a long and healthy life. So he lays down rules to guide us in how to do that. He is the creator of this form, and he's the best knower of how to maintain what he created. If you were to go buy a VCR, it comes with directions. And when you have a problem with it, there has a section called troubleshooting. Or you may call the 1-800 number, because the manufacturer of that VCR, DVD player, or automobile is the best knower of how to maintain what they made. So now, if God is the fashioner and the creator of us, then he is the best knower of how to maintain what he created. So this is why he gives us rules on foods we should eat and foods we should stay away from. This is why it's critical for you to get those 2 books, How to Eat to Live, books 1 and 2. Because in those books you will find the guidance from God on how to live a healthy and productive life. Now, if you look at the top 15 causes of death, most of them are related to the foods we eat, and a lot of them are directly related to eating pork. If pork was good for you, if it was okay to eat a little bit every now and then why are the effects of eating it so deadly? In fact, what you should do is remove every bit of pork and pork byproducts from your diet so that you can live a healthy and productive life. The #1 disease that is caused from eating pork is heart disease, which over 700,000 people in 1 year died from heart disease. Heart disease is when the cells of the heart begin to die. Now, what I want you to understand about the human body, there are only 2 cells in the body that cannot reproduce themselves. Those are the heart cells and the brain cells. They're the only 2 cells in the body. You get 14 billion brain cells. If you destroy them by eating pork, you will get no more. They do not reproduce. You get a certain number of heart cells. When they die, you do not get any more. So heart disease is when the cells of the heart begin to die due to the lack of oxygen getting to those cells. These veins here that you see in the heart provide oxygen to the heart. When those veins become clogged, then the heart cannot get oxygen and the heart cells begin to die. Now, that is the #1 killer in the United States. Almost 1 million people a year die from heart disease. The next disease that comes from eating pork is high blood pressure, also called hypertension. This is when the arteries and the veins in the body become clogged with plaque and the blood can't pass through. So now you have major arteries and veins all throughout the body. The same plaque that forms on your teeth when you don't take care of your teeth is hard, yellow, it's brick-like substance. That same plaque forms on the inside of your veins. Now, if plaque forms on your teeth, the dentist gets a metal hook and he scrapes it out. But the doctors can't go on the inside of the vein and scrape out the vein. If you're familiar with what has been going on recently, Bill Clinton just had, I believe it was quadruple bypass surgery. Tony Blair, the Prime Minister of England, just had heart surgery. That is because the veins are filled so much with plaque that it begins to close the vein up and the blood can't get through. If you've ever had a water hose before, you want to build up the pressure in that water hose. You bend the hose, which prevents the water from getting through. It builds up the pressure. Then when you let it go, it increases the pressure. Well, the same thing goes on in the human body. These veins and arteries clog with plaque and the blood cannot get through, so it increases the pressure. The heart has to work harder, and that leads to what we call heart attacks and strokes. Now, heart attacks, there are 1.5 million heart attacks in the United States every year, and 500,000 people die of heart attacks in a year. Now, you have more than 233,000 women that die every year from cardiovascular disease. And that comes as a direct result of eating pork. When you go to your doctor, you have high blood pressure, you have heart disease, you had a stroke or a heart attack, what does the doctor say? He tells you to lay off the pork. Now, the doctor doesn't tell you to get rid of the pork completely, but he tells you to lay off of it. But it takes you almost dying for him to tell you that. But what we need to do is follow the guidance from God and not necessarily from the doctor who's trying to make a profit from you. If the doctors were the ones we would go to for guidance and instruction, then why don't they live any longer than their patients? In fact, research shows that most doctors die before their patients, so why should we take the doctor's advice and eat a little pork every now and then and not take the advice of Almighty God, Allah, who fashioned us and created us, and eliminate pork completely from our diet? So high blood pressure leads to heart attacks. That is when a heart attack occurs when the heart is pumping so hard, trying to get the blood through the clogged arteries and the clogged veins, that the heart just shuts down. And when the heart shuts down, then the cells in the heart, which are all in sync as far as their rhythm, when the heart shuts down, then one of those cells or a group of cells is out of rhythm with the rest. So it causes what we call cardiac arrest. So then you have to be rushed to the hospital, and they have to get the electrodes to shock you. And those electrodes don't make your heart start beating again. What the electrodes do is stops your heart completely. So all your cells can get back into sync with one another so that you won't die from the heart attack. That is what that electrical shock does. So a heart attack is a byproduct of having arteries and veins filled with plaque. So let's move on to another disease that comes from eating pork. The next disease that comes from eating pork is a stroke. And I'm going to show you a model here of the brain because the stroke deals with the brain. You have these major arteries here, which takes blood to the brain, right? And the brain needs oxygen like every other part of the body. The heart needs oxygen. When it doesn't get oxygen, the heart cells die. They do not reproduce. When the brain does not get oxygen because the arteries are filled with plaque and the blood cannot get through to bring oxygen to the brain, then that leads to what we call strokes. Strokes occur when the brain cells die due to lack of oxygen. You only get 14 billion brain cells. They do not reproduce. This is why people who have stroke, they may lose part of their some of their motor skills. They may lose their ability to have effective speech. They may lose their vision because all of that is controlled by the brain. But if the brain doesn't get a supply of oxygen, then the brain cells die, and that is what we call a stroke. So now that is a direct result of eating pork. Strokes, heart disease, high blood pressure, hypertension, all come from eating pork. Now, we already dealt with trichinosis, which is when the trichina worms invade the muscles of the body and they come up the spine and to the brain. The trichina worms, they start in the stomach and in the intestines. They spread throughout the body and they invade the muscles. We dealt with that. The next disease that comes from eating pork, of the many diseases, we're only dealing with the top 10. The next one is dysentery. Dysentery is a disease of the intestines. When we eat the pork, then there's a disease because the body recognizes the pork as poisonous. So it causes us to have diarrhea. Diarrhea is not necessarily a bad thing, it's a good thing. So dysentery is diarrhea that has mucus and blood in it because the body is trying to flush out any poison that comes into the system. If you had diarrhea, that's your body letting you know that you have eaten something that is poisoning, so it adds liquid to the stool and it begins to flush out the digestive system. So let's move on. As I said before, tapeworms. Tapeworms are worms that live inside of your stomach. They call them tapeworms because they look like a piece of tape. They look like a piece of Scotch tape. They live in your stomach and they eat the foods that you eat. So you may eat a meal and you don't even feel full. So then someone may say, well, boy, you must have a tapeworm. I remember hearing that when I was growing up because I ate so much. But tapeworms come from eating pork. They live in your stomach and they eat the food that you eat. The next disease that we want to deal with is arteriosclerosis. Arteriosclerosis is the hardening of the arteries. As we talked about, when the plaque, which is very hard. If you've seen commercials for toothpaste that removes plaque, you know that it's a very hard brick-like substance. When it forms on the inside of your veins, then the veins become hard. Now the veins are not supposed to be hard, because when you move, if the veins were hard, then they would break and you would have internal bleeding. So God made the veins to be bendable, movable, but when they become hard, then they're easily broken. This leads to what we call bypass surgery. When a part of your artery is filled with plaque, the doctor has to go in, he has to go in, cut that piece out, put a false vein or artery in so that you won't die, so that the blood can get through. But that's only a temporary fix for a permanent problem. If we continue to eat the same way, drink the same way, and live the same way, then the only thing that will happen is another part of our veins or arteries will get clogged with plaque. And we may have another year added to our lives, but we can just eat the right foods and live a long, healthy, and productive life.